My name is Mark Sewell, Assistant Chief Financial Officer at the City of Oxnard. This is for the Finance and Governance Committee on May the 14th, 2024. Additional information with regards to the fiscal year 2024-25 proposed annual budget. Staff recommends that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend the City Council and Housing Authority Board conduct a public hearing on the fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget on June the 4th, 2024 for the City of Oxnard and Oxnard Housing Authority, and provide staff direction regarding any adjustments to the proposed budget in preparation for final budget adoption on June 18th, 2024. Some key terms that are used in this presentation. Adopted budget. The adopted budget as the revenues and expenditures approved by City Council at their budget adoption meeting in June for the following fiscal year starting on July the 1st. Revised budget. This is the adopted budget plus any City Council approved amendments during the fiscal year and any administrative adjustments for the carryover of unspent budgets from the prior year. The City has resolutions that detail what type of expenditures are eligible for carryover. These include unspent CIP project balances and other multi-year project unspent balances. The proposed budget. This is the revenue and expenditures recommended by the City Manager to the City Council for budget adoption at their meeting in June for the following fiscal year starting July the 1st. Spendable fund balance. This is the amount of money held in a fund that is available to be committed for something new. In some cases, a fund will have a council reserve policy, and therefore the spendable fund balance will equal the council reserve plus any surplus or less any deficit. This slide shows the proposed budget for fiscal year 2024 and 25 revenue and expenditures and the impact they would have on the spendable fund balance for a group of funds. So the first line general fund, you can see that the proposed revenue budget is $235.748 million. The proposed expenditure budget is $255,748,000 for a deficit of $20 million. That is an investment in long-term pension debt, paying down that long-term liability. The impact that has, therefore, on the spendable fund balance, on June 30th, 2023, the spendable fund balance for the general fund is $50.8 million. Staff project an improvement of $11.981 million in fiscal year 2024. When you apply that deficit of $20 million, you get to a spendable fund balance in June 30th, 2025, anticipated of $42.781 million. Same logic applies for all the other funds. I've pulled out the Measure O and Major Enterprise funds separately. So as you can see, the spendable fund balance for June 30th, 2025 is lower when you combine all of those funds than it was on June 30th, 2023. And that is intentional, and that is the use of fund balance to maintain services, pay down long-term liabilities. This table shows all fund expenditures and compares the proposed 2024-25 proposed budget with the adopted budget in fiscal year 2023-2024. Within the general fund, the proposed budget is $30.7 million higher than the adopted budget in fiscal year 2023-2024, of which $20 million of that represents the one-time payment towards pension debt recommended as part of this budget. When you take that out, the increase comes down to $10.7 million, which is the same as the anticipated growth in general fund revenues. Moving down to the enterprise funds, there's a significantly large increase, and that represents state revolving loan within the wastewater fund for capital projects. Moving down the list, you see that special revenue funds also has a very large increase of $91.486 million. That represents a state grant for Rice and Fifth project. Therefore, although it looks like a significant increase of $192 million, by far the largest portion of that represents capital funding from external sources. Moving to the capital fund section, you again see the same types of variances as these funds are where these projects are actually expensed. So within the Capital Outlay Fund, there's a $99.794 million increase, the vast majority of which is the Rice and Fifth overpass. And then in the wastewater capital, again, you see the large increase of $42.4 million, which is the spending of the state revolving loan money that's transferred from the wastewater operating funds. Adding this all up equates to a total city appropriation of $961.343 million. And then including the non-city housing authority budget of $42 million, a grand total of just over $1 billion for fiscal year 2024-2025. This next slide gives a little more information in terms of the significant increase in grant funding that's been proposed. And you can see on the table it's split into federal, state, CDBG, and other sources of revenue. By far the largest increase is the $98.05 million of state grants funding, and as mentioned on the previous slide, that is recognized in special revenue and transferred to the Capital Outlay Fund, and that is primarily the largest increase and relates to the Rice Avenue and Fifth Street Railroad Grade Separation Project. Now we can turn our attention to the General Fund. The General Fund is the largest city fund and provides services such as public safety, parks and recreation, libraries, community development, finance, city attorneys, all of the core governmental functions required to operate a city. This slide shows the General Fund revenues, where we present the general sales taxes, property taxes, and other taxes. And you can see that we are projecting a modest growth of total taxes, proposing $205,022,000, an increase of 4.8% over prior year. Within that, we are seeing some strong growth in property taxes, and we continue to benefit from the Amazon Fulfillment Center in the sales and use tax. Other taxes, which are more fees based in terms of building permits, park use fees, fines and charges, they are proposed as a total of $30.7 million, and that's an 8.4% increase over the adopted budget in 2023-24. Overall, total revenues proposed at $235.7 million, an increase of $11.8 million over the prior year adopted budget, representing a 5.3% growth. This next slide shows the general fund expenditures. The underlying expenditures are proposed at $235.75 million, in line with revenues on the previous slide. This table, however, does show you how the proposed budget compares to the FY23-24 adopted budgets by department. So total expenditures of $255.75 million is included in the proposed budget, of which $20 million of that relates to a one-time pay down of long-term pension debt. So when you take that out as a comparison for like, you are seeing a growth of $10.75 million in line with the revenue on the prior slide. Non-departmental, you can see that is an increase of $59.3 million. That is where the pay down of the long-term pension debt is actually programmed, and explains much of that variance. You also see an increase in the police and fire departments and public works departments in comparison to FY23-24, recognizing the new investments in those particular areas. Most of the departments are showing a budget that is growing. The finance department, the human resources department, and the community development department have requested budgets which are slightly below what they requested in FY23-24. This slide shows the impact of revenues and expenditures to the general fund. The beginning reserve, with a target of 13% of operating budget, was $27.8 million at the start of fiscal year 23-24. In addition to this reserve, the general fund had a surplus of $22.988 million for a total beginning spendable fund balance as of June 30th, 2023 of $50.8 million. The adopted budget includes revenue of $223.97 million and expenditures in excess of that at $224,989,000 for a budgeted deficit of just over $1 million in the year. Staff anticipate a favorable variance in fiscal year 23-24 of $13 million, driven primarily by general sales tax, for an anticipated addition in the fiscal year to the fund balance of $11.891 million. So when you add that to the opening surplus of $22.988 million, we have an ending surplus projected of $34.969 million for a total ended estimated spendable fund balance as at June 30th, 2024 of $62.781 million, representing 29.3% of the operating budget. Moving forward then to the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget, the beginning reserve starts at $27.812 million at 13%, and then there has to be an increase to that for two reasons. One is that the adopted budget is growing, the proposed budget is growing, so therefore a percentage of that would require an increase. And secondly, staff are recommending that the city jump straight to the 16.6% target in line with GFOA minimum recommendations for the general fund reserve. To do so would consume $9.455 million of the surplus. Therefore, the beginning reserve for fiscal year 24-25 would be $37.267 million, and the beginning surplus would be $25.5 million for that same beginning spendable fund balance as was the closing ending fund balance of $62.781 million. The proposed revenue budget for 24-25 is $235.7 million, and the proposed expenditure budget is $255.7 million, with a $20 million deficit that relates to the one-time investment in paying down long-term pension debt. Taking that to the very bottom right-hand corner, you can see then in projected a ending reserve of $37.267 million, fully funded at 16.6%, and an ending surplus of $5.5 million for a combined spendable fund balance of $42.781 million, representing 17.5% of operating budget. This slide shows the Measure O fund, which is a half-cent sales tax, and again compares the proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 proposed budget against the adopted budget for fiscal year 23-24. You can see that sales and use tax is projected slightly down, just under 1%, similar assumption to in the general fund for the district taxes. General fund loan payment, that is unchanged from prior year. However, fiscal year 24-25 is the last year of that payment being required to be made. And like with other funds, interest income is projected slightly higher than previous years with the benefits of the interest rates on the cash investments. Therefore, the total revenue is $187,000 higher in fiscal year 24-25 than the adopted budget for fiscal year 23-24, just under 1%. On the expenditure side, expenditures are proposed at $22.6 million, a reduction of $1.7 million, representing 7.1%. And that is due to the weaning schedule, whereby each year an amount of the funding for these projects is transferred to the general fund, meaning these services and programs and projects do continue. However, they are funded now from the general fund. Lastly, a transfer to capital. The Measure O fund is proposing $14 million to transfer to the capital outlay fund, primarily in support of the general fund activities, including streets and many other projects. The net result of this is a use of fund balance of just over $1 million. The impact to the fund balance in Measure O. Measure O began with fiscal year 23-24, $17.5 million in spendable fund balance. The budget for 23-24 included revenue of $21.4 million and expenditure of $24.3 for a net use of fund balance of $2.9 million. Staff anticipate a positive variance in fiscal year 23-24 of $1.1 million. and therefore this will impact the fund balance by reducing the use to $1.8 million for an estimated ending surplus of $15.7 million. That $15.7 million then becomes the start point for the proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25, with revenues projected at $21.6 million and expenditures at $22.6. Again, it's a deficit budget of just over $1 million, and that would result in the ending estimated spendable fund balance being $14.7 million on June 30th, 2025. We now move on to the water fund. The water funds on these tables exclude the transfer in revenue and the transfer out expenditures for moving money between the water funds for the purposes of funding the CIP program. Starting with revenue, revenue is projected next year, in fiscal year 24-25, at $71.4 million. That is an increase of 2.1% over the adopted budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. Within there, you can see the utility fees are actually projected to decline 1.1%, and this is after the water department has revised the amount of water they think will actually be demanded by the community. Miscellaneous income is projected to grow $1.5 million, reflecting higher interest rates at the federal level and the cash balances in the water funds. Expenditures are proposed next year very much in line with where they were in fiscal year 2023-2024, with the main exception of transfers out, where the water department is increasing the amount of money allocated for capital projects. So how does this impact the water fund's fund balance? The beginning reserve target of 25% of operating budget is $16.776 million for fiscal year 23-24. The water funds actually had a surplus of $8.7 million for a total beginning spendable fund balance of $25.5 million. In 23-24, the adopted budget was a slight surplus of $64,000, and staff have updated this with the projecting that they will end the year with just over $3 million improvement in fund balance. This adds to the surplus to produce a ending surplus of $11.678 million projected for fiscal year 23-24, and an ending spendable fund balance of $28.454 million, representing 42.4% of operating expenses. When we apply the 24-25 proposed budget, the beginning balance of 25% reserve has to increase as the expenditures are increasing, and so that $578,000 is added to the opening reserve for a new budget reserve of $17.354 million. That is funded out of the brought forward surplus, but as you can see, the beginning spendable fund balance is the same as the ending spendable fund balance from the prior year. Applying the proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25 shows expenditures in excess of revenues by $10.6 million, which is funded out of the surplus. Therefore, the proposed budget has an estimated ending surplus of $471,000 for an ending spendable fund balance of $17.825 million, representing 27.7% of the operating budget. Moving now to the wastewater funds. Fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget includes $95.6 million in revenue and $98.069 million in expenses for a net use of fund balance of $2.5 million. The two significant numbers here are the transfers in and the capital expenditure. This represents transfers of funding for capital projects, external funding in the use of debt proceeds, and you can see that that is then a significant change from prior year of $45 million in revenue and an increase of $57 million in capital expenditure. The wastewater fund balance began fiscal year 23-24 with the $10 million in reserve at 25% of operating budget and a surplus of $51.4 million for a net spendable fund balance of $61.5 million. The fiscal 23-24 adopted budget had a use of fund balance, a deficit of $5 million, And staff anticipate that actually there'll be a favourable variance to this particular adopted budget of $1.98 million for a net impact of fund balance of a use of fund balance of $3,013,000. When you apply this to the opening reserve and surplus, it adjusts the ending spendable fund balance to $58.5 million. Applying the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget, which is an increase in expenditures, therefore the reserve target needs to go up by $578,000, funded from the prior year surplus, meaning the beginning reserve is $10.659 million and the beginning surplus is $47.83 million for a beginning spendable fund balance of $58,492,000. The proposed 24-25 budget again uses $2.483 million of fund balance as its expenditures are higher than revenues, thus resulting in a projected ending reserve of $10.7 million, an ending surplus of $45.35 million for a total estimated ending spendable fund balance of $56,009,000, representing 145% of the operating budget. Moving forward to the environmental resources funds, this table shows the revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 24-25 compared to the adopted budget in fiscal year 23-24. As you can see, revenues are projected to grow just over 20%, and this is due to the recent council-approved rate increases being assumed for the proposed budget for 24-25. Utility fees are projected to grow by $12.3 million. On the expenditure side, you see that the salaries and wages budget is projected to grow. This is driven primarily by overtime of the current level of service. And all other costs are similar to prior years, resulting in a total expense of $63 million. This budget proposes a deficit budget of $3.881 million as expenses are greater than revenues. The enterprise resource funds began fiscal year 23-24 with $14.4 million in their reserve at 25% of operating budget and a surplus of $6.7 million for a combined beginning spendable fund balance of $21.104 million. The adopted budget for fiscal 23-24 had a deficit, a use of fund balance of $8.9 million, and staff anticipate that there may be a $2 million favorable variance by the end of fiscal year 2023-24 for a net impact on fund balance of a use of $6.982 million. When you apply this to the opening surplus, it actually pushes them into a slight deficit with an estimated ending spendable fund balance of $14.122 million, representing 24.7% of the operating budget. Moving forward to fiscal year 24-25, the expenditure budget is growing and therefore the target needs to grow, and that $578,000 is that increase that has to be funded from the deficit, thus increasing the deficit but maintaining a spendable fund balance of $14.122 million. Fiscal 24-25 budget, as just seen on the previous slide, is a deficit budget of $3.881 million. When you add that to the opening deficit, that results in a proposed ending deficit of $4.7 million when applied to the ending reserve for an estimated ending spendable fund balance of $10.2 million. And that is 18% of the operating budget. The Gulf budgets are very similar to the fiscal year 2023-24 adopted budget, with a couple of changes. One is a slight increase in revenue for interest income due to the higher interest rates. And two is a transfer to capital, adding about $1.5 million, comparing that to fiscal year 23-24 adopted budget, resulting in a deficit budget of $656,000. So how does this impact the Gulf Fund's fund balance? Well, in 2023-2024, the Gulf Fund began the year with its reserve fully funded at $1.444 million and a surplus of $3.68 million for a total beginning spendable fund balance of $5.124 million. Fiscal 23-24 is a surplus budget of $635,000, and staff anticipate no variances to that. This will lead to an ending reserve of $1.444 million plus an ending surplus of $4.315 million for a total $5.759 million. As a percentage of its operating expenditures, this is 101.4%. Bringing in the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget shows that with the budget growing, there's an increase to the target of $578,000 for a new reserve of $2.022 million, and that's funded from the reserve, maintaining the $5.759 million. As shown on the previous slide, the fiscal 24-25 budget has a reduction in fund balance of $656,000 as expenditures are budgeted higher than revenues. This results in the surplus adjusting to $3.081 million with the new adjusted ending reserve of $2.022 million for an ending spendable fund balance of $5.103 million. That represents 71.6% of ongoing operating expenditures. Staff recommends that the Council and Governance Committee recommend the City Council and Housing Authority Board conduct a public hearing on the fiscal year 2024-2025 proposed budget on June 4, 2024 for the City of Oxnard and Oxnard Housing Authority and provide staff direction regarding any adjustments to the proposed budget in preparation for final budget adoption on June 18, 2024. Thank you for watching this presentation.